What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content that I'm uploading onto my channel, then feel free to subscribe, and you can also offer suggestions on topics and characters and storylines and whatnot that we can have discussions on later on in this channel. Oh my goodness, so we are finally here, and I have been so looking forward to talking about this. So for those of you guys who are new here to Comics Explained, who are just now joining us for our segments on The Walking Dead, in the last few videos, we had talked about how Rick Grimes was really becoming fed up with the policies of Negan. Rick Grimes did not like the idea that Negan had basically forced, the Hilltop Colony into subservience. Now, half of that was also done because of Gregory himself, and we'll talk a little more about him in the video because you guys posted some interesting comments in the last few videos where I asked your opinions on him. But because of the fact that Rick really didn't like the direction things were going and living under the thumb of Negan, he had begun the process of rallying people to his cause. Now, from the Hilltop Colony was also Paul Monroe, a guy by the name of Jesus, and he was really more like an ambassador from the Hilltop Colony that would work back and forth between the two. When it came to the Hilltop, though, it was still very much under the control of Gregory, and so despite the fact that Rick Grimes and his forces had effectively taken over the Alexandria safe zone, the issue was that not everybody at the Hilltop agreed with Rick, specifically Gregory, and the citizens in the Hilltop largely still followed Gregory. And so while there were a few outliers here and there, on the whole, Rick could not count on a vast majority of the members of the Hilltop Colony to rally to his cause. And so instead, he really took a brunt of his focus and basically traveled to the kingdom under the rule of Ezekiel, and for the purpose of trying to assuade Ezekiel to his side and rally his forces to go to war against Negan. And so of course we know that the forces of Ezekiel are largely anti-Negan. They really don't like what Negan stands for, and so they were very much alongside Rick with his plans for war. And so what this does is this basically picks up on the day. This picks up on wartime. Now again, what's really cool about this is for Robert Kirkman, there's a lot of emphasis on character development because we've been saying that the whole time, right? We've been saying that when it comes to Kirkman's work on The Walking Dead, you have to focus on character because you can't really focus a whole lot on the zombies themselves. Now again, we'll talk more about this whole zombie element when we get into the Whisperers, because that's when things get really crazy. But for right now, during his conversation with Andrea, Rick says, that he's very nervous about this and he's terrified about it. Now, this is a very important thing for his character because again, it really focuses our attention on the human side of Rick Grimes. Again, with regards to Rick in terms of how he views the survivors, or I guess the people alongside him, is very much like the TV show. In the TV show, we know that Rick Grimes cares about the people that are with him, that are part of his group. They're really part of his family now. And he'll go to the ends of the earth to make sure that they stay safe, and woe betide the poor souls that try to harm them. In the comics, it's almost identical. Rick cares very much about the people under him, but not only that, when he talks to Andrea, he says that there's a huge weight on his shoulders because it's not just keeping them alive. Paul Monroe, Jesus in the Hilltop, the people who support Rick Grimes in the Hilltop, the people in the kingdom who have just come across Rick Grimes and are impressed by his leadership, and especially those in Alexandria and those who have been with him this entire time, they look to him as the savior of the world. And I know this is a little grandiose. I know it's a little, on the nose in terms of what it is that Kirkman's doing, but he's basically telling us that people believe that even if it only starts in this small corner of the world, Rick Grimes will be the man to return society to as close as it can be to the way things used to be. And so for him, it's this massive weight on his shoulders because it's not just saving them, it's not just defeating Negan, it's rebuilding the world. Not only that, Rick also knows that there's always going to be enemies out there. There's always going to be guys who want to hold absolute power, whether it's over a small little area like we have Negan doing now, or whether it's people that we'll encounter later on that want huge swaths of the country to themselves. And so Rick knows they're always going to be there. There's always going to be a foe to face. And so it's balancing, it's walking this tightrope between saving people who are looking for a safe place, rallying them to his cause, but also staving off those villainous individuals who exist out there, as well as trying to rebuild the world as best he can. And so again, it's a great big huge weight on his shoulders here, and it adds a great dynamic to the story because it helps us to view things differently than we normally would. Now again, on the other side of this equation, we have Ezekiel and we have Michonne. Now, because of the fact that Carol, as we've talked about before, because Carol has long since been dead in the comic books, after, basically killing herself when she came to the realization that Tyrese was having an affair with Michonne, Within the TV show, that version of Carol is really a combination of Michonne and Andrea. And then in the TV show, the character Sasha is also a combination of Michonne and Andrea. It's really just kind of a split between the two, just combined into those characters. And it works well for the TV show, but the idea here is that Michonne in the comics is the one who's in a relationship, or at least who's sleeping with Ezekiel. Now, the funny thing about this is that it's really the idea that Michonne doesn't want to let her guard down. The reason why I'm going over these things is because this gives us purpose when it comes to all-out war, because there will be casualties. There are people that we're going to see in the first half of the story who are going to die. It gives us a great emphasis on who these characters are, great relatability, because I think it's important that you guys relate to them as we get further and further into the story. But for Michonne, she doesn't want to let her guard down, because for her, it is a matter of safety. It's really not that she hates people. It's really not that she's antisocial. She is to a degree. It's just that she doesn't want to let her guard down, invite someone into her life, and then lose them. Or even worse than that, have to kill them if they're bitten by a zombie. But the idea here is that for her character, she's still basically trying to come to grips with everything, but slowly and surely, she's starting to let her guard down with Ezekiel, which is actually kind of a cool thing to see. But ultimately, of course, we switch back over to Rick Grimes meeting with Eugene. Now again, at this point in the story, Abraham's dead, and Eugene had put his scientific knowledge to work in essentially creating ammunition for Alexandria, because Rick Grimes knows that whether or not this war had happened, they would have eventually run out of ammunition simply because of the sheer number of zombies out there. Somewhere along the line, they would have fired their last shot in killing a zombie, and they basically would have been reduced down to normal weapons. Now, this is something I'd like you to keep in the back of your head, because when we get to Negan, with regards to this whole conflict, we're actually going to learn that Negan's a lot smarter than he seems. But the entire basis behind this is, again, Rick basically speaking out with those forces from the kingdom, those forces from the Hilltop Colony, and those individuals in Alexandria who have rallied under him for this war. And he basically says, I know you're scared. I know you're terrified. I know some of you believe you're going to die. I know all of you know that some people are going to die. But it's more important that we live the way that we want to live, as opposed to living under the control of Negan. And the only way we can do this is to cast him out, is to basically go to war. He's forced our hand. There's nothing else we can do. And Rick's right here. He's not tricking them. He's not duping them. He's not being duplicitous. He's telling them the truth. At this point in the conflicts between Rick and Negan, there's basically no turning back. There's no way to put things back to the way they were before, after Negan had made his intentions known by killing Glenn. The death of Glenn was kind of this turning point. That was really where Negan screwed up and earned the ire of Rick forevermore. But the idea that Negan was so arrogant, that Negan, had such hubris to believe that he could impose his will over others and they would simply just roll over, was really the straw that broke the camel's back. That was really where he undermined Rick Grimes here. But the fact remains that while, Carl, of course, wants to go along with his father, Rick says, no, you got to stay here. Now, he doesn't say that because he thinks Carl's inept, not by any stretch of the imagination. He says that because he knows Carl is so capable. And with them, with a brunt of their forces basically leaving Alexandria, there need to be a few people who stay behind, like Andrea, like Carl, who basically keep an eye on things and make sure that if an attack is launched while they are facing off against Negan, that Alexandria itself isn't burned to the ground. So while Carl, I've seen some of those comments you guys have posted down in the comment section. Carl! I've seen those memes. They are amazing. But while Carl and of course Andrea are holding down Alexandria, we transition with Rick, with Ezekiel, the whole 9 yards, and they show up outside of the sanctuary of Negan. Now, this is really where the planning of Rick Grimes comes into play in terms of his ability to look to the future of, how these conflicts will turn out. But it's also Rick underestimating Negan. And this is one of the coolest things about this. This is why I love Kirkman's writing so much, is because when it really comes down to character, he writes them in a very human way. And so in the eyes of Negan, Rick doesn't know what he's doing and Negan has the upper hand. In the eyes of Rick, Negan doesn't know what he's doing and Rick has the upper hand. And again, we'll talk about perspectives when we get over to Gregory, because there's a really cool scene that's coming up here where Gregory's entire existence is really a question of perspective. But the fact remains here that when Rick shows up, it's really just battle lines. Now initially he offers an ultimatum. He says, hey, look, man, we came here for an offer of peace. We came here to tell you how things are going to be. You're going to leave us alone. You're going to let us live our lives the way we want to. We're not going to bring you anything. There's not going to be any more tithes or anything like that. If you want resources, you got to go scavenge them on your own, send your own people out. We are no longer operating under your authority. Now, the funny thing about this is Negan has a lot of respect for Rick Grimes. When you cut past all the nonsense, right? When you cut past Negan's insanely vulgar language, which is an amazing part of his character. But when you cut past all that stuff and you really just look at who he is on a fundamental level, he respects the hell out of Rick Grimes. Rick Grimes doesn't respect Negan by any stretch of the imagination. He hates him, but Negan respects Rick Grimes. And when Rick says, look, either you can accept this offer or we're going to start killing people, what he also does is he brings back a rule that he used to have. Now, this is a very important rule for the character of Rick Grimes because it was a rule that he lived by really after the apocalypse started. And it was the statement that if you kill, you die. Now, the reason why he did this was because they had encountered people over the course of their time, you know, whether it was individuals within their own tribe or their own group, or whether it was individuals outside of their group. This was especially prevalent when it came to the prison, but it was the idea that there has to be this absolute standard, basically. You can't have, you know, a situation where you let some things go, and you can't have like modern laws, like laws we have right now, for example. You can't say, well, there's manslaughter, there's murder, all these different exceptions to normal laws. You didn't really mean to kill him, but you accidentally did, that kind of thing. For Rick Grimes, it's either you killed someone or you didn't. And if you did kill someone, then you die. And there's no exception to that rule. Now, he's basically reinstating this for the purpose of telling Negan, we're going to kill you. Like we are going to kill you, and we're going to kill the people in your group who killed other people. But those who are innocent, women and children, those individuals who are just terrified for their lives, they just want a safe place, we'll welcome them into our group. You know, we'll welcome them into the hilltop. We'll welcome them into Alexandria. They'll live their lives just like they have been. They won't have to worry about being oppressed by you, you know, but they will have a great life. It's just you and people like you will not be living anymore. And it's really kind of a funny situation to see Rick Grimes basically telling Negan, you are done with all your living. Like your living is at its completion. Your life is done. And we're going to help you pass on by shooting you in the head, most likely. But of course, Negan responds by saying, nope, I have another idea. And he brings out Gregory. Now, this is a huge deal because Rick Grimes did not see this coming. No one saw this coming by any stretch of the imagination. This is why I say it's really all a matter of perspective when it comes to Gregory, because when Gregory comes out, he basically says, hey, look, those of you guys from the hilltop, if you don't leave now, I'm gonna kick you out. I'm kicking out you and I'm kicking out your families, and you guys are gonna have nowhere to go to. Now, the cool thing about this is when I'd ask you guys the question of what you guys thought about Gregory, I was going through the comments and you guys were very much split. Some of you loved him, some of you hated him, some of you guys thought he was great, some of you guys thought he was one of the worst things ever, an absolute coward, but it's all a matter of perspective. The notion of, well, you know, it's better to die on your feet than live on your knees is a very easy argument to make when you're the only one fighting. But when you have children that can't fight on their own, when you have people who are too weak to fight, when you have those who just don't have the wherewithal to fight, you've got to watch out for everybody. As a leader, your goal is to ensure the safety of everyone. And so for Gregory, when we first came across him, we came across him from the perspective of Rick Grimes, who had been forged in the fires of conflict, who had quite literally gone from a small town police officer in Cynthiana, Kentucky, to being a guy making his way in post-apocalyptic society, killing zombies every day, fighting off, you know, insane governors, killing cannibals. I mean, literally facing off against almost every imaginable threat. We don't know the backstory of Gregory. You know, the only thing that we see is an overweight, creepy guy ruling over a hilltop colony, bending over and taking it from a guy named Negan. That's really the only reflection that we have. But again, when it comes to the idea of perceptions, it's the quintessential example of, to the man with a pantry full of food, somebody coming in and taking it is a thief. But to the man going in and taking it to feed himself and his family, it's not stealing, it's survival. And so it's all just a matter of perspective. It depends on how you look at things. And so the whole point of that, I guess, that little spiel was to basically say that no one's really right or wrong when it comes to perceptions of Gregory, because how you view him is a reflection of how your life has progressed over the course of however long you've been alive. I'm curious, type your all's ages. I want to know, how old are you guys? Because I'm curious, because I feel like I have fans from like all walks. You know, people who are in their 40s, people who might be in their 50s, people who are in their teens, people who are in their 20s and 30s. I have no idea. But like, just because I'm curious, just like punch your ages in. I hope that's not creepy. I hope that's not a creepy thing to ask. But anyway, jumping back to the conflict, the intelligence of Rick Grimes comes in this sense. While Negan has snipers, you know, around the area, Rick Grimes and his forces are hiding behind buses. And so they're basically shooting at all different directions, but they're not shooting for the purpose of taking out Negan's guys. They are to a degree, they're hitting those where they can, especially those that would be so dangerous to them. But Negan has the question, he says, like the snipers have taken cover, why are they still shooting? And this is when we learn the reason why Rick had his forces shooting as much as they did was to draw the attention of zombies. Now, this hails back to the first introduction of Abraham, and this is genius by Rick Grimes, but this goes back to the first introduction of Abraham. When Abraham was first introduced alongside Eugene and Rosita in the Walking Dead comics, he first first came across Rick Grimes when him and his guys were shooting guns, and Abraham said, that's stupid, don't do that, because if you do, a zombie a mile down the road is gonna hear that, and that zombie is gonna start walking this direction, and then a zombie is gonna follow that first zombie, and then more will follow him, and then soon you'll have a herd 10,000 strong, all heading in this direction. So what you're doing is stupid. Kill them with hatchets, kill them with baseball bats, kill them with anything but something that makes that much noise. And so that's really where Rick learned this lesson. This is one of the cool things about Robert Kirkman's writing, is that everything feeds off everything else. It's like chemistry in high school. The test you take at the end of the year, you know, or what you learn at the end of the year is predicated on everything you learned in high school up to that point in terms of math and science, you know, and with Kirkman's writing, it's the exact same way. Everything builds on everything else. We'll find references to Ezekiel later on down the line, long after his character has moved on in The Walking Dead, after he's no longer part of Rick's group, you know, in terms of going off and doing his own thing. We'll learn all different kinds of things, you know, when it comes to these characters, and it'll all build on everything else. But the idea here is that one of the girls named Holly initially hands herself over. Now, of course, the goal here for Rick was that he knew that Negan wanted to keep him alive. And the reason why is because all these people have rallied under Rick. And so the easiest way to break their morale is to break Rick. If he can break Rick and convince Rick to basically turn to his side, or at the very least push Rick to the brink of insanity, then he can present Rick Grimes to the rest of, you know, his forces and say, hey, look, this is what I'm going to do to the rest of you if you do not back down and if you do not accept my rule. But Holly says no. Now, Holly is a character in the TV show. She died almost immediately after she was introduced. She showed up when Abraham saved her and a few other people from a construction site. I don't know how many of you guys remember that. And then when the wolves attacked, she was killed off in that conflict, and that was it. In the comics, she actually had an affair with Abraham. Now, the whole basis behind Abraham and Rosita was that Abraham had actually begun dating her simply because of the fact that he just didn't want to be alone. He told her he loved her, but he never actually did. It wasn't until he came across Holly that he actually fell in love. And so because of this, he and Rosita split, and Rosita basically took up residence with Eugene, if only for a measure of safety and familiarity, basically doing the exact same thing that Abraham did, although she never really said she loved Eugene. But the basis behind this is that Holly says, look, they need you. Everybody needs you here. You need to get out of here. You need to rally the forces back up, you know, to marshal them for another attack. I'll take care of this. And so she basically knocks Rick out, you know, because Rick doesn't want to let her go. You know, she knocks Rick out, she jumps in the vehicle, she takes off, and she smashes down the gate. And by doing so, she basically allows all these zombies to come pouring in. Now, this is one of the coolest things about this, you know, as we kind of, you know, skim through this a little more. This is one of the coolest things about this is in The Walking Dead, it's very easy to forget that there's zombies out there. It's very easy to forget that there are just mindless dead people roaming around, and Kirkman wrote it that way. Kirkman designed it to be a story where zombies were initially the main focus. When we got to volumes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, zombies were initially the main focus. After that, once we got from, you know, volumes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you know, going on up until now, it started being about the characters, and it started being about how bad things got in a post-apocalyptic world, and how bad and how good people can be. It was a very character-driven story. And so with things like this, you know, when Rick Grimes draws the attention of a horde of zombies and has them come rolling in, it changes everything because it reminds us that there are just these mountains of zombies out there. Now, of course, once this is done, once Rick Grimes is able to get away, and we have, of course, the forces that survive the experience that have managed to get away, initially they're celebrating. But Rick says, hey, we have nothing to celebrate yet. We've just started. This is just the beginning. We'll celebrate when this is done. We'll celebrate when this is over. Now, something else that I really want to emphasize here, something else that I think is very important for discussion is the rules of Negan. Now, this is going to be a very adult-oriented topic. And so, you know, those of you guys that don't feel comfortable with this kind of thing, I don't know if you want to skip ahead for a couple of minutes or something like that. But when it comes to sexual assault in The Walking Dead, Kirkman does not shy away from this. Holly's been taken prisoner. Kirkman doesn't show you things, not at all. But during the incident with the governor, for example, he held Michonne prisoner for quite some time and abused her in a multitude of different ways. Negan is not like that. Negan has rules. Now, this is one of the reasons why Kirkman's writing of Negan is so cool. It'd be easy for us to believe that with Holly being taken prisoner by Negan, he would just let her, you know, let his guys do whatever they wanted to do to her. But Negan says, no. We're not going to do that. The way that we learn this, I mean, he's kind of mentioned it before that he's not really a fan of that kind of thing, but we'd never really seen an instance whereby he had lashed out in such a way. And what happens is there is a guy who basically makes his way into Holly's cell. The guy's name's David. And he says, hey, I just wanted to introduce myself. Negan wanted me to make sure you were taken care of. And he basically begins to strip away the clothes of Holly. Now, Negan walks in as this is happening and he loses his shit. I mean, he just freaks. And this is one of the interesting things things about him is because, again, we would consider him to be crazy, a guy that doesn't care what his people do to women that are taken prisoner, but he says no. He said, not only is it just against a rule, not only, something that he just doesn't like, it's also rooted in this idea that for Negan, he wants to rebuild. For Negan, it's not just conquest, right? It's not just, I want absolute power and I want the world to revolve around me. He's not a narcissist. Negan is a guy who, after this is all said and done, however it is that this ends when it comes to this war that they're fighting, however it is that this ends when it comes to the zombies going away, they're gonna rebuild. And when they do, there's not gonna be a place for people who are so insane like that. He wants to rebuild a peaceful world. Now, this is cool because this goes into the origin of Negan, which Kirkman's actually writing right now. I will have a video on the tentative origin that we got, one where he was basically like, here's what I was before I was, before all this stuff happened. But in terms of an actual full fleshed out origin of Negan, Kirkman's working on that at the moment. We're only like 5 or 6 issues in, and it's supposed to be 12 issues long. So it's a pretty cool story. But the basis behind this though is that, Negan says, hey, look, I want to rebuild things, and so he says, David, repeat after me, we do not rape. And after David repeats it, Negan slices his throat. He actually cuts his head off, and that's it. And one of the funniest things about this is he tells Holly, look, I'm sorry you had to see that. I just want you to understand, we're not monsters. And the reason why this is kind of funny is because we would perceive Negan as a monster. I mean, just smashing their heads in with a baseball bat wrapped in barbed wire named Lucille. I mean, it's just one of these crazy situations. And so because of the fact that all these zombies are outside the facilities of Negan, the sanctuary, we learn that what he basically does is he tasks his guys in taking 2-hour rotations. They're gonna go out, they're gonna clear as many as they can and then come back in. And then they're gonna go out and they're gonna clear as many as they can and then come back in. Now that's a pretty efficient way to do things. Not only that, he tells them, use whatever you can. Use bats, use sticks, use rocks, whatever, but he never says use guns. And the reason for this is because, like we talked about in our last video, Negan never uses guns unless he absolutely has to. And the reason why is because bullets are a rare commodity. And in order for them to be used effectively, they have to be used only under the most dire of circumstances. And so basically he only uses artillery whenever it's absolutely necessary, especially with what's going on right now with regards to this war. But killing zombies who move extremely slow, it could be, eliminated with a simple bash to the head with a solid object. It'd be a waste to shoot him with bullets. Now, this is a huge difference between him and Rick, and it actually shows us that in terms of how he operates in keeping his people safe, he's actually smarter than Rick Grimes, because Rick Grimes is, from the word go, when he emerged from his coma and they were off to the races and they were fighting zombies, I mean, he was just guns blazing. He was just smoking them left and right. I mean, he didn't ask a question. It wasn't until Abraham came along that said, don't do that because you're going to attract hordes, that Rick said, okay, maybe we shouldn't. And a lot of that was due to the fact that they would attract a horde. It wasn't attention to this idea that they may run out of bullets. They focused on that a few times, but that was never the reason why he stopped using guns. He simply just didn't want to attract a whole bunch of zombies their direction. And so because of this, it really shows us how Negan relates to his own people, but it also shows us how intelligent Negan is in terms of conservation, in terms of maintaining things. And so what we do here is we transition back to Gregory's arrival alongside with the 8 people who basically left Rick and his forces to fight against Negan when they get back to the hilltop. Now, of course, Maggie is still sort of running the show, but not really, in the sense that she was kind of a liaison for Rick Grimes when he's not there, when he's not around. But Gregory is still very much in charge here. But what this does is this shows us a shift. Basically, Gregory loses all standing. And the reason why is because Maggie says, she goes to the people and she says, hey, look, Gregory's a coward. Gregory is not keeping you guys safe because he wants to keep you safe. He's keeping you guys safe because it's easier to roll over than it is to fight. And so she says, look, if you guys follow Gregory, you're going to be living this life that you've been living, under Negan forever, until you're killed by a zombie or you die of old age. Whatever the case may be, you're going to live this way. That's how things are going to be. That's how Gregory would rather have you live, because Gregory is weak of both mind and spirit. And so she says, the only way to really get out of this, is to kill Negan. Rick is doing what you asked him to do. And now when he needs you the most, you back out. And she effectively calls them cowards. That's really what she says, is all those people there are cowards. They would rather have somebody else fight their battles for them than go out and fight the battles themselves. Now, while this would initially seem like something that would turn the entire colony against Maggie, it actually rallies them to her side, which is a really, really great thing. And the reason why is because following this conflict, we switch back over to Ezekiel. Now, Ezekiel's basically spending time with Michonne, and Ezekiel tells us from his perspective how things unfolded after the retreat, after they had all bailed out, and they had started heading back. And what he says is, after this battle, after Negan and his guys are basically trapped, Rick launched a campaign to take out the most fortified of his outposts, to basically go off against his outpost. The problem with this is that with the outposts themselves, they were all effectively booby-trapped. Whether it was a combination of guys who were well-equipped, or whether it was simply just zombies who were all over the place, the idea is that they were completely overwhelmed. And so while they were able to hold themselves off relatively well, the issue with this was that at the end of the day, they were really caught off guard here. And so from Ezekiel's perspective, the issue that he faces is that as ruler of the kingdom, he was essentially forced to watch people die, but more so than that, he felt like he had led them to their deaths. And so while he was able to make his escape, while he was able to get away, fight off some of the zombies, and he was eventually rejoined by Shiva, when she helped to fight off a zombie, after Ezekiel was able to get away and he turned around, she was swarmed and she was basically killed by zombies. And so Shiva the tiger was killed, was eaten, consumed. Now, the reason why this is such an important aspect when it comes to the character of Ezekiel, this is probably some of the best character development we get, is because we know that Ezekiel is a guy who's not necessarily weak-minded. He's a guy that just capitalized on being in the right place at the right time. But we also know that he had come to view himself as a legitimate leader of the people in the kingdom, that he came to realize these people need guidance. They need someone to look up to, and he saw himself playing that role. The problem with this is that after coming to the belief that he had basically led so many people to their deaths, after coming to the belief that he had, or I guess witnessing the death of Shiva, he's basically lost everything he loved and he feels like a failure. And so initially he says he can't do this anymore. He says, I can't be a leader. I don't want to do this anymore. And Michonne punches the hell out of him because she says, if this is how much of a coward you really are, then pretend you're not a coward. Now, this is one of the important things about Kirkman's writing. This is one that I want you guys to consider. I know that there are a lot of situations where I'm talking about how Maggie refers to people as cowards and how Michonne refers to people as cowards. The reason why is because in the minds of Michonne and Maggie and even Rick Grimes, these people are cowards. But the kicker to this is that Michonne, Maggie, Rick Grimes, the people that they're with, they're not the norm. The norm are the people who are just hiding out. The norm are the people who are just making it day by day. Gregory and his guys, Ezekiel, the people that are under him, those are the normal folks. The characters of Rick Grimes, Maggie, Michonne, they're the exception because they're almost rabid. They are almost like people who are feral. They've just been out in the wilds for so long that it's almost like they've lost their humanity. And so that's one of the important things about this, is that for Robert Kirkman, it's constantly this reflection. It's constantly this dichotomy between people who are making it day by day and Rick Grimes. And so it's very easy for us to say Rick and his forces are really, really strong. But we also have to remember that in a lot of ways, they've forgotten what it really means to be human. But in any event, of course, what we do is we basically pick up with a lot of people who are sort of grieving, over the loss of some of the people that they knew in the fallout of the attack on the outpost. But in the midst of Rick talking to these people inside of the church, they're suddenly met with a massive explosion. And once they get outside, they realize that there's a giant semi-truck and Negan is here to play. And this is amazing. Because this is one of the coolest parts. This is where things really pick up. I know it's been kind of slow up to this point, but this is where things really, really, really start to move fast. Negan says, we're not going back to the way things used to be. We try to play nice. I tried to show you how things were going to be. You threw it back in my face. Now I'm going to kill you all. He says scorched earth policy. Now, for those of you guys who don't know, scorched earth is a legitimate military tactic. And what it means is that when you're either occupying a place or you're leaving a place, you basically eliminate anything that the conquered people can use, or those that normally live there could use. So it was like when the North went into the South during the Civil War, they salted the fields, they tore up the railroad tracks. I mean, they just eliminated the ability for anybody to make any real living in that area. And that's what Negan says. He's like, like, I'm dropping the hammer on him. Like, I'm dropping the bomb on him. This is it. He says, we're gonna go in and we're not only gonna burn this damn village to the ground, this town to the ground, we're killing everyone. We're killing Rick Grimes, and we're gonna make them an example. And so what happens is he initially brings out Holly. Now, the idea is he says, look, just to show you guys how things are going to be, just to show you guys, what's going to happen, I'm going to let you have this girl back. I'm going to let you have her back. I'm going to kill you all, but I'm going to let you have her back because I want you to see that you brought this on yourself. And this is basically Negan saying, look, I wanted to show you that I'm a good guy, that I'm not a terrible human being. I've been trying to work with you and you've been screwing me over time after time. And so of course, when she's met with Denise, who is Alexandria's doctor, and Denise pulls off the mask so that Holly wouldn't actually know the location between, the sanctuary sanctuary and the Alexandria safe zone. When she does, Holly is a zombie. And so Holly bites Denise, and in the mass panic, Negan says, attack! How genius is that? How smart is that? Oh my God. Robert Kirkman, I love you, man. Dude, this story is amazing. And so it's really just like mass panic. It's just absolute chaos at this point. Like, the doctor's been bitten. The one doctor they have has been bitten, and she's going to die, you know? And so all panic really, you know, all help really seems to be lost for the long term. But as we know, when a person is bitten by a zombie, they don't turn immediately. They have to die first. Now, in The Walking Dead, it's also kind of a mixed bag here. There are circumstances where it's believed that being bit by a zombie speeds up the dying process. There have been times where that's not the case. You know, it's somebody's bitten and they just shoot them in the head in order to ensure they never become a zombie later on. But the idea here is that their doctor is basically gone. You know, Denise is, there's really not going to be any way to help her. Not only that, when Heath makes his way over, suddenly he's hit by a grenade and he loses both of his legs. And Negan is, I mean, he's relishing in this right now. And this is one of the coolest things. This is one of the things that I love the most about this is Negan has some amazing one-liners. One of the things he says while he's watching all this pandemonium and all this chaos is he says, my dick is so hard right now, it could crack steel. Now, of course, this just shows us that for Negan, this is just him getting what he believes he was owed. You know, this is him getting back at Rick Grimes for all the experience, you know, all the torment, you know, and so on and so forth. But not only that, we also have Dwight. Now, the funny thing about this is, with the exception of his one meeting with Ezekiel and Rick and Jesus, I'd forgotten about Dwight, to be honest with you guys. I'd forgotten that Dwight was Rick's man on the inside. And so where some of the guys, you know, where Dwight basically leads an assault against, you know, one of the backsides of Alexandria, as his guys begin to make their way towards the fence, he kills them all, you know. And then when Jesus looks over and says, what in the heck is going on here? He says, hey, look, I killed my guys. I'm going to throw you these grenades. You guys can use them. And then I'm going to go tell Negan, you guys attacked us from the side. You know, he says, I'm your guy on the inside. Like, I want you guys to trust me. And so basically, you know, we've got Rick and his forces who are attacking Negan, not only from the inside, but from the outside as well. You know, and so because of this, things are really just mass chaos and absolute panic. Not only that, we also have Rick and his guys who have been joined by Maggie and a multitude of other people from the Hilltop Colony, all of whom are brandishing guns. And so it really seems like Negan's being attacked on all sides. But in the midst of all this panic and in the midst of all this chaos, Dwight initially goes to Negan and says, hey, look, man, like, we have all these people who are fighting against us, man. We got to leave. We got to withdraw. We've got to go back. We lost this battle. And Negan says, no. He says, Alexandria is on fire. We're basically burning their entire town to the ground. It's eliminated in its entirety. Like, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing I'm seeing, but we've basically won. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this first part of All Out War to an end. Again, this is basically just a couple of trades. Negan released them as 2 separate stories. And so the next one we'll pick up with next week. But with that being said, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the subscribe button. If you guys enjoy this video, make sure you drop a like and leave a comment down below. Let me know what you guys think about The Walking Dead so far, because this comic is amazing. And I will catch you all later. Peace.